This is video number 3 in our series on the work desk. In this video, I'm going to show you how I turned the legs. They turned out to be really beautiful.
The key that I've found to making and turning a nice leg is to start off by drawing out on a piece of 1/4 inch plywood the exact layout of your leg, including measurements. And don't be afraid to get into significant detail here. You want to get the distance between each one of your points, you want to get the right width, and you want to get all of these details down and plan them out onto your template. And once you've got your template, it's just a question of applying that to your workpiece as it is turning, and you'll see me do that as I go along.
I really wanted the entire table to be built in cherry. So I did buy some pieces of cherry that were about 1.5 inches thick. I cut them to size, laminated them together, and cut them to square so that I could put them on my lathe. And a couple of things I realized. One is this takes an awful lot of time to do the lamination. There was a lot of wasted wood, which was not very pleasant. I mean, cherry is not cheap, but the biggest problem that I ran into, and you'll see it right here, is that my middle piece, there turned out to be a hidden problem in there, and when I was turning it, the leg essentially blew out. So it's still holding together, but with this type of mistake, there's no way you can get around it. I mean, this piece is shot. So I looked at my options and I said, well, I know I can get golden birch blanks that are 3.25 inch square. They're readily available. They're relatively inexpensive. And the golden birch actually looks pretty close to what cherry looks like. So that's what I ended up going with. I tried, but yeah, that was not fun. Just not fun at all. I start by finding the center point on both ends of a blank. I find that with this squaring tool, it's worthwhile to draw lines from all 4 corners. That'll give me the true center. Once I've got that true center, I use a punch just to mark the point. When you're turning a leg like this, it's worthwhile to think of the leg as a number of different sections. The top section remains square. That's where the apron is going to go in. So the first cuts I'm going to make are going to be to isolate that top from the rest of the leg that's going to be rounded over. So I'm using my square. And by the way, I really like this square. Once I've gotten my initial marks using a skew, I'm going to use a roughing gouge to clean up part of the leg. I'm now going to use a parting tool to make a first depth cut, and this is going to isolate the top section of the leg. To finish things off, I'm going to go back to my skew and clean up the cut marks on the top section. After using a roughing gouge to roughly turn the rest of the leg, it's now time to start attacking the next section. The next section is a series of 3 beads. I start off by doing a depth cut using a parting tool, and that's going to mark the spot where those 3 beads are going to be. I had previously identified the reference points for the bead. All I'm doing now is using my pencil and transferring those lines all around the blank. Next, using my skew, I'm going to separate each of the beads
And once the separation is properly done, I'll use my detail gouge to turn the beads. Next section is a cove, so back to the template, back to the plan, start identifying all of those reference lines. I will start off by making a depth cut at the bottom of that section so that I've got the proper depth. I'll remove a lot of material, and then using my detail gouge, I will go ahead and cut that cove. The next section is a ball. Once again, I use a parting tool to identify the bottom of that section, and then using my detail gouge, it's just a question of turning that ball, which is really a big bead. Below the ball is another cove. It gives you the symmetry, because if you see on top of the ball is a cove, on the bottom there's going to be a cove as well. But what I did find is it was easier to turn the top of the next section, which actually turns out to be kind of half a ball and then a tapered leg. I found it easier to turn the top ball before turning the cove. That way the material was out of the way and I was able to turn the cove without any impediments. Next, it's time to turn that taper. There's a lot of material to remove, so I start off with my roughing gouge and remove most of the material that way. But once I'm done with the roughing gouge, it's back to the detail gouge and just a series of cuts to remove the excess material and try to make it as nice a cut as possible so that it will reduce the amount of sanding that I need to do. The bottom of the leg is a series of beads and coves and you name it. There's a lot going on there. And those details, once again, it's just a question of marking those reference points using the template, using a parting tool to remove material to the proper depth, and then using my detail gouge in most cases just to turn beads and turn all those coves.
The final section of the leg is a small taper. So I use my roughing gouge to remove most of the material. Then I find my depth at the very bottom of the leg, and then it's just using my detail gouge, I'm going to go ahead and finish everything off and give it the final shape that I want. Turning a leg like this took me about an hour, including sanding time. Once again, if you've got a good plan, it's pretty straightforward. Attack it in sections, makes for a nice job. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please take a look at the others in this series. Hit subscribe, hit the like button. Love to hear from you. Thanks.